Welcome, everyone. I'm Miguel Jiménez with Make Lit's Lit Luz Festival. I'm also the founder and director of the Lit Luz Book Club, and I'm excited and honored to be your host today. ¿Qué tal? Bienvenidos. Soy Miguel Jiménez, formo parte del equipo del Festival Lit Luz y también soy el fundador y el director del Club de Lectura Lit Luz. Y tengo el honor y el orgullo de ser hoy el presentador para el evento de esta noche. Tonight's event will be in English. We have live English to Spanish translation available. So it's really easy. If you want English to Spanish translation, you just have to click on the link below the video. It'll take you to a Zoom session, and that's where you'll receive the live translation. El evento de esta noche va a ser en inglés, pero tenemos traducción simultánea en vivo de inglés al español. Así que si quieren la traducción, simplemente tienen que hacerle clic al enlace que está abajo del video. Y ese enlace, ese link los llevará a una sesión de Zoom donde recibirán la traducción en vivo. Así que los doy unos segunditos para que puedan acceder a la traducción. I'll give everyone just a few seconds to find that translation in case you need that. Get your tea, get your coffee, get your wine, get your beer, water, whatever you need for tonight's event. Tonight's conversation is brought to you in partnership with National Immigration and Justice Center. El evento de esta noche es presentado junto al National Immigrant Justice Center. The National Immigrant Justice Center is one of the country's leading human rights organizations. NIJC's mission is to establish and defend the legal rights of immigrants, regardless of background, and transform the immigration system to one that affords equal opportunity for all. Through NIJC's partnership with nearly 2,000 pro bono attorneys from the nation's leading law firms, NIJC provides free and low-cost legal services to over 10,000 immigrants, refugees, and asylum seekers each year. For the past 3 decades, NIJC has been bringing a comprehensive approach to advancing immigrant rights and creating humane immigration laws, providing life-changing legal services to immigrants and refugees, fighting against unjust policies and practices through litigation, and advocating with elected officials to protect immigrants in our communities. To learn more about NIJC and to donate, please visit the link in the chat. Again, thank you for being here with us tonight. I'm really excited in conversation with Valeria Luiselli to discuss her book, Lost Children Archive, with our very special guest, Erika L. Sánchez. Following their conversation, we'll have a Q&A with Valeria Luiselli. So we'll be taking questions from the YouTube chat. So if you can just submit your questions as we go, we'll have someone collect them and they'll be collected and then asked to Valeria after her conversation with Erika L. Sánchez. So to begin, I'd like to first introduce our guests for the night. Valeria Luiselli was born in Mexico City and grew up in South Korea, South Africa, and India. She's the author of the award-winning novels The Story of My Teeth, Faces in the Crowd, and Lost Children Archive, and collections of essays, Sidewalks, Tell Me How It Ends, an essay in 40 questions. Her work has received multiple awards, and Valeria is a recipient of a MacArthur Fellowship. Erika L. Sánchez is the daughter of Mexican immigrants, the author of poetry collection Lessons of Expulsion, and the debut a young adult novel, I Am Not Your Perfect Mexican Daughter. Her memoir, Crying in the Bathroom, is forthcoming from Viking. She has also won multiple awards. She is a National Endowment for the Arts Fellow in Poetry, and currently the Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz Chair at DePaul University. I'm very excited for this, and I hope you are too. So please welcome Valeria Luiselli and Erika L. Sánchez to your electronic devices.
Thank you so much, Miguel. I'm so excited to be a part of this. I taught the Lost Children Archive last quarter at DePaul, and it was a great hit. Everybody loved it, and there were so many amazing conversations that came from it. I really enjoyed it. And so as I was reading, I was so fascinated by the research that went into it because it was so meticulous. It felt, at least for me as a writer reading it, I was like, wow, this took so much work. And I was wondering if you could talk about that process of how you began the research, because it just seemed like it's such a grand like goal to accomplish. And like, how long did it take to complete the book itself?
Well, hi everyone, first of all, and Erika, thank you for doing this in the middle of this pandemic, in the middle of so much going on. It's a pleasure to be doing this with you. I mean, whole books are hard to write, right?
Yes.
I don't know. And then you finish, and then you don't really know exactly how the hell you did it. And then you start again, and then you don't know how to do it again. No, you have to relearn everything, it seems. I honestly move very much sort of in the dark when I'm writing. I don't set out with very clear, with a lot of clarity, except about the questions that I'm interested in, and maybe a set of intuitions and rages and things that guide me but are not quite easy to articulate at the beginning, right? So it is always a long process for me because it takes me a lot of time and a lot of reading and a lot of listening and documenting and interviewing and just sort of thinking and meditating before I even know exactly how I'm going to do things. I don't even know what language I'm going to write in when I start a book, and I'm always between Spanish or English, and and it takes me at least a year. I mean, with this book, it took me more than a year to decide which of the two languages to write in. And in the meantime, it's a great way to procrastinate, unfortunately. In the meantime, I write notes in both languages and hope that at some point I'll find the exact rhythm and gaze in one of those languages, and that will propel me. And in this particular novel, the research was kind of varied. I mean, it was really a lot just living through things and traveling and listening to people. In 2015, I worked for a while as a translator, interpreter in immigration court for children of the Central American diaspora who were seeking asylum in the USA and who needed basically people to translate their testimonies so that pro bono lawyers could hopefully take their cases on and defend them against a deportation order. So I started writing a lot in that period. But at the same time, after some time writing and working in this, I realized that the novel was turning into the most horrible kind of Frankenstein because I was trying to kind of retranslate what I had heard in court and needed to somehow rearticulate and almost process for myself. And I was transferring that to this fictional fabric. And at some point I realized that I wasn't doing any justice to the novel because it was just unreadable, just a bunch of like rage and confusion put together. And I wasn't doing any justice to the situation either by trying to insert it into a fictional vessel. And so I stopped writing the novel completely. And then I just wrote a short essay called Tell Me How It Ends. That is just a very direct testimony of what I was seeing in the courts those days. And after I wrote Tell Me How It Ends, I was able to return to Lost Children Archive and not think of it as a political instrument, but really as a novel. And a novel is not an act of activism. It's not cannot be or I don't think it can be thought of as a political instrument. Of course, it can appeal to people politically, but you can't write it like that, I think. And I think of a novel much more as a kind of space, where people breathe and pee and get divorced and have children and have sex, and I guess not in that order, all of it, but
Sure.
but where people are alive. And so I was only able to do that and feel that again once I wrote Tell Me How It Ends, and I could come back to the novel and let it breathe fiction somehow.
Yeah, wow. I feel like we have similar writing processes, and it's fascinating to hear about how it all came together. And so, thank you
Do
for
you
explaining that.
move between the two languages, or how do you think about bilingualism?
Not so much the language part. I do think very much in Spanish, and I feel in Spanish, and I dream in Spanish, but I typically write in Spanish. I mean, in English with Spanish kind of woven in, because that's kind of my identity. You know, I grew up mostly speaking English in school, and my entire education was in English, and so, but my home life was in Spanish, and so it's just like this weird mix, and they're very much intertangled. But the way that you talk about like obsessions and rage, and like it's incredibly messy. You don't know where you're going, what you're doing a lot of the time. I'm like, yeah, I totally feel that way every time I write a book. I'm like, I have no clue what's going on. And I think that's part of the pleasure in writing it, right? Where you surprise yourself, because if you already know what's going to happen, then what's the point even?
Point.
Like, yeah,
Yeah.
like you have to enjoy it yourself, I think. And that's something that I try to tell my students, like, you should love the process as well. And it sounds like you do. And we could hate it as well, you know, like that I think is perfectly natural.
Yeah, it's hard, and I mean, of course, and sometimes it's such a struggle. And but what you're saying is exactly right. I think that, I mean, I know that there are many writers who sit down because they have the discipline to, I don't know, get through 10 pages a day or something. I could never do that. I know that I trick myself into the discipline, and my only way of tricking myself into sitting down every single day for hours is by generating enough enthusiasm that I want to sit down and do it. And sorry, my family's having fun upstairs. I don't know if you can hear that. Let's go. Okay, I'm glad you get. But anyway, it's generating that enthusiasm, and then sitting down with it. But it involves all sorts of self trickery, I guess.
Yeah, and I love that so much of it came to you through the work that you were doing in the world, you know, and like you were part of these conversations, these very real, raw conversations about immigration and like people's actual experiences, and a lot of the details were just incredibly upsetting in, you know, in reading the book about detention centers, about young children crossing the border, etc. And you know, I read recently "Once I Was You" by Maria Hinojosa. Just it comes out, I think, this month, probably in a few days.
Mm.
And she writes so much about detention centers, and just the gruesome details are just staggering, you know. And I wonder, when I read these books, I become very enraged. I write a lot also about immigration, in some ways, not as explicit in that sense, where like, you know, I haven't conducted those kinds of interviews or anything like that, like not such a journalistic approach. But
Yeah.
you know, my family immigrated here from Mexico, and it's something that I care very deeply about. Um, but anyway, just learning all of these things, and just digesting people's stories, like it feels sometimes very hopeless, especially now. I'm thinking of the things that I learned about detention centers prior to COVID. And so like what is happening now, I can't even fathom, you know? And
Mm.
so as a writer, sometimes I feel not powerless, but I feel like, what's the point of me writing about this? You know, what can I do about this
Yeah.
directly? And so I waver between, you know, being hopeful and being hopeless. And like, I anticipate that you do as well at times. And so, um, what can writers do? What kind of responsibility do you think we have? And then also, what can everyday people do as well? And not just in terms of like the detention centers, but this current moment of like racial violence and the pandemic and et cetera. It's just like such a fraught
Yeah.
time, and it's really hard to wrap your head around everything that is going on.
I know, I agree. But I do think we can, if not change the narrative in our time, in our lifetime, move it forward at least generationally. My impression as someone who came here 11 years ago, so it's quite a long time, but at the same time, I didn't go to school here. I didn't go to primary school here. Although, however, I went to a kind of military school in Korea. Not military, there weren't like soldiers there, but most of the kids were sons and daughters of American soldiers who had married Korean women and stayed after the Korean War. So most of the kids were Korean American, and most of the families were family army people of men in the army, and some of them women in the army. And I remember that, I mean, as in most Mexican households, you grow up with a kind of nationalism that is very anti-American. It's very in reaction to it. As Mexican, I mean, I wouldn't stand up and sing the national anthem in that school, for example. No, and
me neither.
Yeah, interesting. And but I don't remember studying anything about the relation between Mexico and the U.S., for example. And now, as a professor here in colleges, I've taught in several different colleges, and as a graduate student, I would teach Hispanic culture at Columbia, and now I teach at Bard. And I always ask my students how much they know about U.S.-Mexico relations, and if they studied the war, anything about the war in the 19th century, and most of them say no. I mean, so they say something like, "Oh, something about Alamo," and so my feeling is that there is a very sort of guided ignorance that has been constructed into the very system of education and of telling ourselves the narrative of this country. And therefore, it doesn't come as a great surprise that most adults don't think that immigration is a pressing issue. If faced in polls and faced in polls by the question of what are the most pressing issues of today, immigration doesn't come even in the first 3 or 4 places often for people, because it's viewed as something kind of external, as another, like their problem, not our thing. And so, I mean, I think it can be explained because of the sort of the lack of this discussion in primary, elementary, and high school education. And therefore, I mean, the narrative has to start changing there. But we as writers can start moving the narrative forward by sort of making visible things that may become visible in headlines sometimes, but then disappear and just sort of become ephemeral. And when I wrote Tell Me How It Ends, and as I was writing Lost Children Archive, let me remind you, that was the Obama administration, and not the Trump administration. Right. And I wrote that book, not Lost Children Archive, but Tell Me How It Ends. I wrote it in like very direct response to what I thought was a liberal America that was completely almost voluntarily ignorant of immigration issues. And because we had a Democrat in power, people were kind of relaxed. They thought, no, it's not a big thing. Nothing's really happening. Very few people were aware of the atrocities happening then. So I wrote that book wanting to make visible something that people were just not wanting to see. Now, immigration, because of the brutality and frontal violence of this administration toward immigrant communities, it's sort of back on the table, right? But it'll disappear again if Biden wins, and I hope he does. Yeah. But immigration will stop being a concern for people if we have the Democrats in power, unless they are brutal, which I hope is not the case, right? So I think it's really important that we as writers from different immigrant communities, and I mean, we may come from different immigrant communities, but we all come from communities and have family members that are undocumented or that are in difficult situations, or that have been mistreated in one or another ways. So I think we can all connect, and even if we don't have personal experience, I think we are human. We can absolutely connect to a person's story and to a community and become involved. So I think that it is our duty to move the narrative, or at least leave a narrative behind, right? A narrative that can then be refuted, that can then be perfected by the next generations, right? We'll fuck it up in many ways, like what we say, right? I mean, yeah, and but we have to leave something for others to come and say, well, that's wrong. Let's think about it like this. If we don't at least leave something, there's no possible dialogue.
Yeah, and I think the power of literature is the fact that when we read a book, we enter a character's psyche, typically, and we experience very human emotions that are universal, and all the things that separate us, like it's transcended. They're transcended through like excellent writing. Really, I think excellent writing can really like help people understand how others live, how others feel, how others just exist in the world, and so I am hopeful in that sense, where books change people. Books have changed me. Your book changed me. Many books have changed me. And so I'm hoping that that happens for many other people, and those people will carry that in their consciousness as they move forward in life. So
absolutely,
yeah. But I think I just get really pessimistic at times, just like reading the news. I'm just like, what the fuck is the point of anything, right? But I fluctuate. Tomorrow might be better. Anyway, so I was wondering, I mean, I have a ton of questions, but one thing I was wondering is how you've been surviving this time. Like, how do you keep yourself afloat spiritually, emotionally, socially? I mean, so many people are struggling in so many different ways, and I'm just always looking for guidance from other people. Like, how is everyone just managing this time?
Yeah, I'm also looking for guidance. I think the beginning of the pandemic was very difficult in New York. We saw the numbers rise at a speed that nobody was prepared for. And by the time we were shut in, a lot of us were already sick. And I think that those months were very traumatic, and that the city is still coming out of that trauma, that collective trauma. I mean, it's going to take a while, I think. And I mean, I remember the first months of the pandemic just as a kind of soundscape of ambulances all day and all night long. And then how those sort of that soundscape shifted from ambulance sirens to police sirens when the protests began and the police started going after protesters. And my daughter said to me at some point something that really left me so sad and without really knowing what to say back to her. She's almost 11. She's very, very smart. Much more than we were probably at 11. Much more than I was. And she said, the ambulance sirens, I preferred the ambulance ones to the police ones, because the ambulance ones were like, they reminded us that if we had trouble breathing, we could count on someone to come pick us up and take us to the hospital. And these ones are just a reminder that some people get suffocated because of the body that they have and the color of their skin.
Oh my God.
Such a brutal thing to understand and to feel, to know that she was like processing this all the time at 11 years old. And so, I mean, a lot of those months, I think, we're just devoted to making every day bearable, to like making it through the day, I think. And my mother had to leave the U.S. because she doesn't have any kind of like residence here, and she doesn't have medical insurance here or anything, and she's older, so we were scared that she might get sick here, and then what, right? And then so she left to Mexico, so I stayed with I adopted a niece, an 18-year-old niece, and my daughter, so it was just me, my daughter, my niece, and our dog Lola. And it was hard, but also we found a way to put it, like to keep it together. And I think it was partly because of the enthusiasm of the girls, and they wanted to plant seeds. I hadn't planted a seed since I was in kindergarten, when they showed me how to plant frijoles in like those.
Oh, wow.
Cotton, inside cotton. So they wanted to plant, and we started planting things, and we ordered the bookshelf in alphabetical order, like things that happened. But all those little things we were doing. We cleaned the house like I've never cleaned anything before. Like I think I learned like the taxonomy of dust in a way that I would have never. I ended up writing an essay about dust. That was all I could think about.
That sounds like a book title, Taxonomy of Dust. If I take that, I'm sorry.
Go ahead. So yeah, I think very little concentration, difficult to write, easier to read. I was able to read it, and I think, and we started reading out loud to each other a lot to kind of ground us in a kind of togetherness that went beyond just cleaning and cooking together. And I think reading out loud to each other was a great thing that grounded us somehow. So we pulled through. Now my mom's back, and so now it almost feels like okay, now this is etapa número dos. No, let's see what happens. And this moment feels a lot. I don't know, definitely a lot less brutal, but I think for all of us, confusing as well, because we are not quite there, but more and more there's a pressure to go back to normal, right? So we see people more, but with the mask, and I'm teaching again in person, but outside.
Oh, you are? Wow.
Yeah, outdoors with masks, but I'm teaching in person at the university. So we'll see. I was just desperate all the time to be able to concentrate on writing again, and slowly. Yeah,
it's a distracting time. I totally understand. I have spurts myself, and other times I'm just like in a pit of despair.
But, right? There was it's a terrible metaphor, but it's not actually a metaphor. It's real. There's the ice cream truck that makes that annoying sound, that song that I think it's probably the same in many places, at least. Started driving up and down our street in March when it was really cold still. So no one went out to buy ice cream because we were in the middle of a pandemic and it was March. Yet the ice cream man drove every day at the same time, twice a day, at 1 and then again about 6 p.m. And no one came to buy him ice cream ever, but he still did it every day. And I was like, well, that's what I just have to do, and what we all have to do with writing, and just like sitting down. Like now it's like I'm Pavloved into this now. Like he drives and I sit down. I was like, okay, if I had lost concentration, it's like, okay, I'm back to work. Thank you, ice cream man. But anyway, it's just like that persistence of sitting down. When you sit down to write, 90% of the time, it doesn't go well. But then one day it goes really well. And then, but that day, you don't know when it's going to come. So you just have
to
sit.
That's so true. Yeah, you're just waiting for it. It's such a high that you can't replicate in any other way, I feel.
Absolutely.
Well, we have time for one more question. I would like to ask about the project you're working on with the poet Natalie Diaz. I read that you were collaborating on something, and I was wondering if you could talk at all about it, or is it something that is so, secretive that you can't share? That's okay too. But I was very intrigued because I'm a fan of both of your writing.
Oh, I miss Natalie so much. We have different ideas, always kind of going on, and they're always in a whirl and in a chaos. And we did a collaboration last year or two, I don't even know, like time right now. I think it was last year in Las Vegas in a courtroom, in a fake court, like in a Las Vegas fake courtroom. And we did a performance there. And now I'm working on a sound piece. It's like a sonic essay, or I mean, that's probably like, that sounds like a 1980s group, like pop group. But it's like a sound piece, which is an essay,
like in the Lost Children archive.
Right, I'm just replicating my characters. Yeah, kind of. So it's a sound piece about the history of violence toward women and toward land in the U.S.-Mexico borderlands. And among the many things that I'm interested in doing in that project is having a collaboration there with Natalie, and she's been thinking a lot about surveillance at the border. And we're doing something about that, which I can't talk much about. And then the other thing that we're thinking about, but we haven't gone too far yet because we need money, a lot of it, is we want to buy this town called Shakespeare that I've been obsessed with for several years. I've gone to it several times to interview the people there. It used to be a town where they did reenactments. Well, it was first of all a mining town, then became a ghost town. Then it became a reenactment town where they did Wild West reenactments. And then that didn't work out, and it became this very eerie space for reenactors to go practice lynchings, hangings, and gunfights. And so reenactment groups together there and just like practice these like arts or whatever you would. And so it's an eerie place, and so but it's owned by this private owner. And if we got money to buy that town, it could become like a space for counter reenactments in which I think we could have residencies for artists, an archive of borderlands history, performances, gallery space, like just turn it into maybe a space of resistance in a otherwise like a space that is now very much devoted to silencing and erasing the histories of some peoples in the borderlands areas, right? So yeah, we just have to figure out how to buy this town.
I love that. That's so ambitious. It's amazing.
Well, we'll see what happens. It's also good ideas,
Well, if I could help in any way, let me know.
Absolutely. I mean, the idea is to get a group of women together and go take over.
And where is it located?
It's in New Mexico. It's
okay.
It's like just 10 miles south of Lordsburg, New Mexico.
Oh, okay. Wow. Yeah, New Mexico has a very bloody history.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah. Wow. Well, we've run out of time. Thank you so much. This was really fascinating. And thank you to Lit Luz and Miguel, everybody. This was really a light in a dark time. So thanks for providing that experience. And this was excellent.
Yeah. Good luck with everything going forward. And much light to you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Estás muted, Miguel.
There we go. Thank you. So we have a few questions for you, Valeria, from our viewers, our streaming viewers. So as you all were talking, I was listening, but I was also thinking how the best way to organize them. So I want to start with a question here that we got about the organization of the book. I love that you talked a little bit about how the book was sort of this Frankenstein thing that was happening. So we have a question here about the boxes and the categories. Can you walk us through the organization of the book and what did it come out of that sort of Frankenstein process?
Yeah, I never know how I'm going to organize a book, and I'm definitely not interested in like chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, chapter 4. I kind of wait until I have enough clarity, enough like material to start thinking about how to play around with form. And once I start playing around with form, I have a lot of fun with that, because I mean I can start like really moving things around and trying to understand a scheme of organization that will seem to me eventually like the only possible way to organize a story, right? Like like thinking in terms of chronology, thinking in terms of um, of of how pieces communicate with each other, thinking in terms of like how things echo each other and mirror each other, and that's, I guess, the part that of in my discipline and in my personal experience writing that I enjoy the most. But it's also the hardest, and I also have to be very patient, because I can only get there once I'm deeply into the project. And this book, the architecture of it came about very slowly. I, for example, didn't know exactly what I knew. I knew, for example, that this family was traveling with boxes in the car, because they had this project and needed to have their materials with them. And at some point, I mistrusted my own sense of space. I'm, for example, a person who does not know how to pack a suitcase very well. I always overestimate or underestimate. And so I actually went and bought some boxes, banker's boxes, to see if the objects that I was saying were in there could actually fit. And that was a really lucky thing, I think, because once I bought those boxes and I started playing around with the contents, and that became a structural part of the novel, not just something that appeared there, but that's how like the boxes became chapters somehow, and or interstitial chapters. And at the beginning, actually, those boxes in the novel, those chapters, were long essays about different subjects. So one was called On Collecting, the other one was called On Documenting, the other one was called On Archives. And so there were these digressions about things. And that was the original, the first draft. My editor was like, no, this is not going to. And not only my editor, but several very trusted readers that a couple of people who are the first to read anything I write, everyone agreed that that was just way too much. And also the book was just huge, because there were these essays stuck there in the middle. So that I did away with that, and I thought about it for many months. But it's a lot of trial and error, I guess, right? It's a lot really about like making choices that are always about how that part is going to fit the whole, right? It's like kind of community thinking. It's like really how thinking of the greater good in the book, and every single bit there has to play a role in the larger structure. It can't just be there, right?
That's amazing, because then I'm hearing all these different elements that you had in there, and then you had to figure out, okay, what stays, what changes, what do I transform? And then you added a book within a book. And so I'm kind of blown away that you had all these things that you had to figure out. So there's actually a question about that from one of the listeners, one of the viewers right now, Diana. She says, she has a question I have is the dialogues that the books have with other books and poems. What does she say here? Yeah, she says, Lost Children Archive has a book inside of it. If I remember correctly, it's called Elegies for Lost Children. Before I figured out that you also wrote that book inside of the book, I looked everywhere for it. Someone saying here, can you talk about the book inside of the book, and how did you arrive at it?
Yeah, it's not something that I wrote later, and then I was writing it as I wrote everything else. Like, actually, there are 3 voices, or 4 if you consider the boxes to be a voice, in the novel. And I started writing all of them kind of at the same time. And I would sometimes be propelled by one, or the boy's voice, or sometimes feel like I got disconnected from that, and then it was like the woman's voice who would have a greater grip on me, and then the voice in the elegies for lost children. And so I kind of just wrote them for a while, and once it was very clear to me that there were three distinct voices, but that were interlaced somehow, and that I had to find a way to braid them all together. I started trying out different ways of doing that, and I didn't want the elegies for the lost children to just be like some kind of parallel something. I wanted it to be sort of deeply embedded in the consciousnesses of the characters and have a presence in the novel. So it ended up being something that they read, and that they read out loud. And yeah, I mean, about you looking for that book everywhere, it's really cool. And I've tried to convince editors in several places that we should publish a little, just like a chapbook with just that book. But that my idea hasn't flown well yet.
It was and I could understand the person that asked that question, because it did feel like, I mean, even in the book club that we read it in, we were wondering, like, wait, so does it exist? Does it not? And that was a lot of the questions that came up with that. I love that you talked earlier about how immigration is often not seen as a pressing issue, and not seen as a concern. And so I was seeing a question that just came in, kind of, that sort of brings that into question, and about the role that maybe that the book plays in a world with these issues. I liked earlier that you said also that you when you were in conversation with Erika, that you were saying like that you think fiction is kind of like an opportunity for people to peek in, right, where what people are living. So there's a question here that I really like, and it's by a viewer right now. His name is Hector. He says, considering that much is being written not only both sides of the Mexico-U.S. border, but also in Europe on the migration crisis, how does Desierto Sonoro, Lost Children Archive, add to this conversation? And then they kind of pose a second question here. Can it be that the dehumanization of indigenous peoples has now, in parentheses, officially spread to the dehumanization of children, as we also read in Emiliano Monge's Las Tierras Arrasadas?
Yeah, that's a great book, Las Tierras Arrasadas. It's a book that I've read a couple of times and taught as well. I mean, I think Erika and I touched upon this a bit when she was asking me about like hope and hopelessness, and why we do this, right? When things seemed like so dire. And it seems to me that something that is also not, immigration is not a problem, right? It's a reality, and it has always been a reality, and it will always be a reality. And I think more and more as we start seeing climate change refugees, as we start seeing this sort of also a new world order in which there are pockets of fascist states emerging everywhere. So we are living in an age of migration more than ever before in the history of humanity, even if from the beginning of our history, migration has been the motor of so much. So narratives around migration, of course, converse with each other. And as I was saying earlier, I think as testimonies of our times, they are necessary in that they push the conversation forward. And they're not more accurate as time moves forward. They're not better necessarily, but they are kind of like what the layer that we leave behind in our passing through this world. I mean, we're here for some years, right? And we leave that layer of conversation behind that older, late. Oh my God, the ice cream guy.
Oh, is it out there? No way.
You can hear it?
What? No, I can't hear.
You can? You will. Anyway.
Oh, I can't hear. That's amazing, though.
Listen.
I do. I hope people can hear it. That's amazing. You were just talking about that.
He's late today. Yeah. So it is. Yeah. Basically. Sorry, the ice cream guy.
The ice cream guy. Talking about the ice cream guy. There's a question here, and I think it can maybe help us continue that thought that you had. There's a question here by here it is. Oh yeah, from someone, Mia. There's a part in the book where when the woman questions how art can help address social injustices, it's a part of the despair that she feels as she's trying to help her friend find her 2 daughters that are detained. And then we see this character crying and cursing at a plane that is deporting children. It seems like oftentimes our desire to help are met with feelings of uselessness, which leads to despair, which could lead to inaction. Have you thought of how to address that despair that could help people give up? Or they also ask, how do readers of this book become helpful agents of change? So yeah, how do people that read this book, how do they do something or act on it?
I have no idea. There's no way that I think I, as the writer of this book, can answer this, and I don't think that a book can be written with any very concrete plan about how people are going to take it as a springboard for action. I think that also thinking like that can lead to books that are pretentious, right, and intellectually arrogant, thinking that they're going to actually do something. I mean, I think that one can only hope that a book that one writes stays in the consciousness of the people who read it and does something, some kind of good alchemy to that consciousness. And if that implies that that people become more engaged with things that they weren't, that's fantastic. But there's no possible like calculus of this. It's also hard enough to write a good sentence.
Yeah, and I'm wondering, I'm seeing this question about your choices here as a writer, and there's a question here that says, as I read the book, I felt at some point that there might be or would be a clear comparison between the consequences of being documented versus undocumented, both from a legal perspective as well as a historical one. However, I felt like there wasn't an obvious discussion of that. Instead, I felt like there were hints or echoes of that comparison. Was that a literary choice or as a choice as a writer to leave that for the audience or the readers?
Yeah, I mean, I believe in ambivalence, and especially in fiction. I mean, not so much in nonfiction, because they're different vehicles of thought, right? And I think a novel is not meant to pose problems that are then solved in front of you, because that can lead to like very preachy, dogmatic novels, and those novels exist. I don't like to read those novels, therefore I don't write those novels. I prefer a novel that poses questions and relies on, that knows that the readers have the power to do with those questions whatever they want to once that novel is in their hands.
Mm-hmm. There was a question here which I'm interested, because now that you mentioned that, as things have gotten worse, and you and Erika were talking about this, right? Erika was talking about how she sees things getting worse and worse and worse, especially with this president. Is there something you would do different with the book if you were writing it now, or is there something some choices that would be different?
It's a weird question because I don't know. It's like counterfactual. I mean, I already wrote that book. Mm-hmm. I think that if I were to write about this particular diaspora again, I would it wouldn't be a novel. Like, also, mind you, this novel is not. I don't think it's a novel about immigration. I think it's a novel about other things, and among them about a country in which there's an immigration crisis. But more than immigration itself, it's about the cycles of political violence in the USA. It's about how periodically the USA structurally and kind of based on its own foundational myths as a country excludes, but beyond excludes, marginalizes, silences, and erases entire populations in front of everybody else's eyes and with no one doing anything about it. So from the relocations, first genocide and then relocations of Native Americans, to periods of slavery and segregation, to contemporary mass incarceration, this is a country in which that is the modus operandi. That is how things are. And that is what the novel addresses, how narratives evolve, how things are silenced, how narratives pass on from the adult generation into the children's generation, and what we do with those narratives, right? So, okay, that aside, if I were to write about immigration right now, it would be more an essay about mass incarceration, about the industrial prison complex, and how that is really the underlying problem. How really immigration would be dealt with differently if there wasn't a machinery that this government is feeding in order to produce revenue with bodies in confinement.
Yeah, that there's this, again, an ongoing cycle, right? But this time feeding into something else that profits from it. Yeah. I'm going to ask you one last question, and I hate to do this porque es muy americano, right? So, American. A ver, let's end on a positive note. No, but I'm going to do it because I saw the question and I like this. So, Valeria, you talked about needing to have enthusiasm to sit down and write, and I think everyone's looking for guidance. The question is, any tips on working up to that enthusiasm? So actually working up, any tips to work up to it?
Well, I think that that uncertainty is a very good thing for enthusiasm. Like really, like starting with something that like uncertain, like a let me think about it. Think of it as a kind of tightrope that goes from certainty towards uncertainty, and the certainty is something kind of ineffable and almost just a kind of feeling, like a rage or a brutal fear or a deep melancholy, whatever that feeling that's going to sort of propel you, carry you is. And then the other end of the rope is uncertain. You don't know where it ends, and that is what generates that the necessary tension and enthusiasm to move towards that. So it's like, instead of, like often fear, uncertainty, doubt, all of those things can stifle the creative drive, but they can also ignite it if you kind of just, it's almost like just flipping the coin a little bit and seeing the other side of that. And it's I think it's just an internal process that we have to perform in order to not write against fear or against uncertainty, but with those things.
Yeah, and I love ending on that note, because as you mentioned earlier, we're hoping things get better in this world, in this country, and there's some uncertainty there, but we have to flip it a little bit, no? To get out there and do what we have to do to make things better.
I think so. I agree.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Valeria. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so very much. A pleasure to speak.
For the conversation. Again. All right. Thank you so much.
Hasta pronto.
Hasta pronto. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Thanks again to our participants and our co-presenter, National Immigration Justice Center. Find out more about this wonderful organization in the chat. Muchas gracias por acompañarnos, gracias nuevamente a nuestros participantes y a nuestro copresentador del Centro Nacional de Justicia para Inmigrantes. Pueden obtener más información sobre esta organización en el enlace del chat. And thank you to John Ibarra at Q4 for running the show and to Bill McKay for supplying the music. Gracias a John Ibarra de Q4 por dirigir el programa y a Bill McKay por la música de esta noche. We're really excited to announce that this fall's Lit Luz Festival will also be virtual, and it's going to take place October 3rd through the 9th. The theme is Remix, Respond, and Rebuild, and we'll be welcoming back Lit Luz alums along with new participants. Programs include writing workshops from Julián Herbert and Sara Uribe. That should be amazing. A keynote by Cristina Rivera Garza. That's going to be amazing. And events addressing the convergence of arts, activism, and politics. The live show will be hosted by amazing poets Jose Olivares and Jimena Gonzalez, and it's going to feature new work from an amazing lineup of Lit Luz alums. Estamos muy emocionados de anunciar que este año el Festival Lit Luz va a ser virtual y llevará a cabo el 3 al 9 de octubre. El tema es Remix, Respond, Rebuild. Daremos la bienvenida a ex participantes del festival y junto a nuevos participantes. Los programas incluyen talleres de escritura con Julián Herbert y Sara Uribe, una presentación de Cristina Rivera Garza y eventos que exploran la intersección entre el arte, el activismo y la política. El live show tendrá de presentadores a José Olivares, Jimena González y presentará nuevos trabajos de varios artistas. Be sure to subscribe to this YouTube channel for updates and follow us on social media. So we are makelit, and you can find us on Facebook, on Instagram, on Twitter, and we'll be announcing details and opportunities to sign up and participate in these virtual conversations and communities. Por favor, suscríbase a este canal de YouTube para recibir anuncios sobre el festival, detalles y oportunidades para registrarse y participar en nuestros eventos. Tonight's winners, we have to announce the winners. We had a raffle of sorts for copies of Sonoro Desierto, copies of Lost Children Archive. So if tonight's winners are and they are the winners are Yvette Castañeda and Garen Citral. The winners again are Yvette Castañeda and Garen Citral. So we'll be in touch with you about those books. So other than that is it for us. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you at the next events. We have 3 more books that we're reading as part of the Lit Luz Book Club. We have Nate Marshall's Finna, Illegal by Jose Angel Navejas, and Bezoar and Other Stories by Guadalupe, Another Unsettling Stories by Guadalupe Netel. So if you are interested in reading those books with us and then attending the event like you saw tonight, please go to litluz.org/book club and you'll find all the information there. Thank you very much and have a good night.